Well, they call them swan songs, a final album. We're going to talk about 10 great final albums by legendary bands coming up next on Music Meanderings. I'm Mike Lamneck. Thank you for watching Music Meanderings. Won't you do me a favor and like the video? Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you'd like to help the channel out, you can be a super thanks. Just hit the thanks button down at the bottom. It all helps out the channel, and we greatly appreciate it. Well, today going to talk about 10 great final albums. Now, these are final albums as far as studio albums for a certain lineup of a band. Some of these bands continued on with different lineups, but these were considered to be the final album by the classic lineup, final studio album. Not talking about greatest hits or live albums here. And in no particular order. By the way, I'm sure that you have your picks, and please comment below what those are, what you think the best 10 final albums by classic legendary acts are. I've got In Through the Outdoor by Led Zeppelin. Released in 1977, the final Led Zeppelin studio album. Yeah, they came out with Coda after that, but that was pretty much B-sides and outtakes. This was their final studio effort. And it's kind of a polarizing album for Led Zeppelin. Some fans really like it. Some fans really dislike it. It added a lot of keyboards to the mix thanks to John Paul Jones. And a big part of that was that John Paul Jones and Robert Plant would be in the studio before everybody else. And they would work on these songs, which kind of gave them a different flavor than past albums where Jimmy Page would kind of guide the tunes. It had classic packaging too, released in just a brown paper bag sleeve that had the title of the album on one side and of course the tracks on the flip side. And inside that were 6 different pictures, pretty much of a guy sitting in a bar. And you could get one of 6 different covers. Now, something I didn't realize until recently is that if you look at the spine of your album, there are letters A through F, which designate which one of the 6 styles of album covers that you received. And also inside, of course, who found out the hard way that that was watercolor, right? You had the inner sleeve out, and as it was back in the 70s, maybe just had it sitting out on a table or something and somebody spilled something on it and whoa, it's a watercolor. So spent a lot of money on the packaging. Again, what do you think of Led Zeppelin? In Through the Outdoor. I think it's a great album. One of my favorite Zeppelin albums, but definitely different from what they had done in the past. Next up on survey of great final albums by classic acts. David Bowie and Black Star from 2016, recorded at a time when Bowie was fighting liver cancer, but before it had been publicly announced. And the whole recording of this album in New York City was, well, kept a pretty close guarded secret. It's jazzy, intricate, mostly somber, reflective lyrics, of course, considering that he knew his life was running short. Released on Bowie's 69th birthday, January 8th, 2016, and he died 2 days later. Included on Jimi Hendrix and The Experience, their final album, ambitious 2-record set, cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower, of course, Voodoo Child, Crosstown Traffic, more than 70 minutes of Hendrix. And this forever put him in the category of rock's most innovative and influential guitarist for sure. He really steps out on tracks like the improv jazz number Rainy Day, Dream Away, and the 15-minute experimental blues romp of Voodoo Child, which features Steve Winwood on organ and also Jefferson Airplane's Jack Cassidy on bass. Well, I talked about at the beginning, some of these albums aren't necessarily the final album by the group, but the final album by the classic lineup of the group. And that is what's going on with this next album, Street Survivors by Lynyrd Skynyrd. Released in 1977, many fans consider the end of the classic era, coming after that tragic October 1977 plane crash that killed 6 people, including founding member Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, and backing vocalist Cassie Gaines. Street Survivors, issued just 3 days before that tragedy, marks the end of that first classic Skynyrd era, featuring iconic Southern rock anthems like that Smell, What's Your Name, You Got That Right. The album went on to become Skynyrd's best-selling, reaching number 5 and going double platinum. Now, following the plane crash, the record company wisely pulled the original cover that featured the band standing in flames and replaced it with a flameless cover photo. I'm Mike Lamneck. It is Music Meanderings, and today I'm meandering about some classic final albums by classic rock acts. George Harrison's final studio album, released in 1987. It was his first after 5 years. He hadn't released an album in 5 years as a solo artist. His final solo album released in his lifetime. Of course, he went on after this to do other work, including the excellent Traveling Wilburys project. But this was his final solo album until the posthumous Brainwashed, which was released in 2002. That was a year after his death. Now, while most fans would say his 1970s legendary triple album, All Things Must Pass, is his best solo effort, Cloud 9 could be close behind. Harrison was surrounded by an all-star cast of players, including producer-performer Jeff Lynne of ELO, Ringo Starr, you've heard that name before, right? Eric Clapton, Gary Wright, and Elton John, all on the record. It featured the huge MTV video single, Got My Mind Set on You, and the album cover features Harrison holding his famous, recently returned at the time, 1957 black Gretsch guitar. You know, few bands are able to call it quits when they're at the top of their game, but that was the case with the Police when they released their 5th and final studio record, Synchronicity, in the summer of 1983. Largely inspired by the Arthur Kessler book called The Roots of Coincidence. The album boasted 4 singles, including the mega hit Every Breath You Take. Synchronicity was nominated for 5 awards at the 1984 Grammys and won 3 of them. Now, tensions were high in the studio at the time of the recording, with band members Sting and Stuart Copeland reportedly even coming to blows during the recording of Every Breath You Take. Studio engineer Hugh Padgham says that creative tension in many ways is what led to make the album so great. Looking at final albums by classic rock acts, sometimes they knew it was their final album. Other times, I don't think they did realize that this would be their final album as a unit. The 19th and final studio album by Canadian progressive rock giants Rush, released in 2012. Hard to believe it was that long ago. It was their first studio album since 2007's Snakes and Arrows, although a compilation and live albums had been released during that time. Rush had dabbled with concepts in the past, notably 2112 and Hemispheres, but this was to be their first fully realized concept album, each song being a part of the concept. In fact, drummer and lyricist Neil Peart came up with an ambitious dystopian steampunk clock-driven world concept, calling each song a lyrical chapter. Peart and a friend, science fiction novelist Kevin J. Anderson, actually wrote a novel around the album's story. And that's a great read, by the way. It's actually a series of books now, Clockwork Angels. Peart succumbed to an aggressive form of brain cancer and died on January 7th, 2020. The remaining 2 members, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, at the time said they would never perform as Rush again. Well, from a group that had 19 albums to a solo performer that only had 2. Although, to be fair, she did have other albums. I think a total of 4 albums if you count her albums with other groups, talking about Janis Joplin. And Pearl was the second and final solo album for her. Released 3 months after her death in October 1970, she was joined in the studio by her current touring outfit, the Full Tilt Boogie Band, and the record features some of her most well-known material, including her take on the Chris Christopherson song Me and Bobby McGee and the whimsical Mercedes-Benz, the last song she recorded before her death. It's been certified quadruple platinum and is on Rolling Stone magazine's list of 500 greatest albums of all time. The last track on side one is actually an instrumental due to the fact that Joplin wasn't able to put down her vocal before her untimely death on October 4th, 1970. Well, the classic Queen lineup recorded their final album together in 1989 and 1990. Working around Freddie Mercury's declining health, it marked a return to the top on the U.S. charts. The first time Queen would do that and reach gold status in the States since 1984's album, The Works. Critics called it a return to the classic 1970s over-the-top bombastic style of Queen. Similar to David Bowie's Black Star, Mercury and the band knew the album was likely his last statement, and the lyrical themes reflect that with songs like I'm Going Slightly Mad, These Are the Days of Our Lives, and The Show Must Go On. Sadly, Mercury died from complications from AIDS on November 24th, 1991. And finally, what was the final album by the Beatles? Final studio album? Well, that depends on how you look at it. The final recording sessions were for 1969's Abbey Road, but the final Beatle album release was 1970's Let It Be. Both are timeless classics and, of course, deserve mention. Songs like Let It Be, The End, and The Long and Winding Road served notice to fans that the four were likely moving on to their next chapter. Well, what do you think? What are some great final albums by legendary rock groups and acts? Go ahead and comment below and join us again for more Music Meanderings.